For weeks now, the Florida Gators were the favorites to land edge rusher KJ Ford, Kevin Ford, and now they're not?
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Friday. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. And today's episode of Locked On Gators is gonna be up and down, right? Because I mean, this is recruiting, right? This is the nature of the beast of recruiting. Edge rusher Kevin Ford is announcing his commitment today. 4-star on every site. A lot of variance there, but a 4-star on every site. On On3, he is 234th nationally, 26th edge rusher, 34th player in the state of Texas. On 24/7, he is 98th nationally. Nobody is as high on Kevin Ford as 24/7 is. 98th nationally, 11th edge rusher, 16th player in the state of Texas. ESPN has him 148th nationally, 19th edge rusher, 18th player in the state of Texas. And on Rivals, he is the 101st player nationally, 12th edge rusher, and 14th player in the state of Texas. And that's I feel like this recruitment has gone so insane, right? Because, well, Florida for quite some time was leading the way for Kevin Ford, right? No, not an insanely long time, but in recent weeks, basically since Kevin Ford took his official visit in early June, there was positive momentum on Florida's side of things. Not saying that they were necessarily the favorites there, but they were positive momentum going. And in a recent week or so, we started really getting the reports that Florida could be the favorites for Kevin Ford strongly, right? Everybody thought they were the favorites. It was he had Alabama, Florida, Texas A&M, and Ohio State. And then he put out a top 3 of Florida, Texas A&M, and Ohio State. And then it felt mostly like Florida and Ohio State. And then, because again, we need another and then here. And then it felt like Florida. And I think a lot of Florida Gators fans, we kind of took a deep sigh there. And we were like, all right, it seems like it's settling down. And then we get the reports yesterday by I forgot his last name, but Tim from the On3 Alabama side of things. And it was a very interesting report that all of a sudden Alabama were significant players again for Kevin Ford. And again, there was obviously traction with them for a long time, but this felt like kind of a shock because I think a lot of people thought, well, Florida is leading here. Like Florida's got the lead. It's no longer Ohio State in there. It's no longer really Texas A&M in there. Feels a little safe. And then Alabama comes in. And the most interesting part about it was the quote, which is what I was just looking up. Conversations have picked up recently, initiated by the Ford side. And that, to me, is really interesting because, the initiated by the Ford side is just really interesting to me. Honestly, like even more interesting than just outright losing the commit or potential commit. Because again, let me say that there are quite a few people that still think Florida has a very good chance here. So it feels more 50-50, but also, again, initiated by Ford's side tells me that it was either one, a money play, right? That it was either, hey, I'm going to commit to Florida tomorrow unless you want to pay me this amount of money, which this is just me speculating. One, a money thing, or two, he doesn't actually want to go to Florida, and really wants to go to Alabama. Steve Wiltfong added on to the post by Tim and said, quote, I think if dialogue continues to go well today, meaning yesterday, Bama will pull it out. He's always loved Bama. Spring and summer OVs were strong. The two sides could be syncing back up at the right time. And again, I fully understand like Bama should still be recruiting him, right? Bama should still want him. But I am really intrigued by him initiating things because, again, that either tells me that it's a money play or that he never really wanted to go to Florida to begin with. Just interesting to me because it also means, at least the way that I think about things with this is it sounds like it's now Florida versus Alabama. With him being the one to reach out to Alabama, that makes me uneasy because even if he does commit to Florida, what just happened? Again, if Alabama made the push and he was deciding between Florida and Alabama, I would feel at least pretty comfortable about surviving that push. But if he made the Alabama push, does that mean that he's going to try to ball out this fall and then circle back to Tuscaloosa, circle back to Alabama, keep his eyes on Tuscaloosa always? Is that what it's going to be? That like let's say right now Alabama hypothetically were to be, hey, you're not a take, and so I'm going to pick Florida. Does that mean that he's going to be looking at Alabama? Because that's not exactly a fun feeling to have from the moment you land a commit, especially when I'm someone that says, well, if someone commits and it feels like there's a close second or a 50-50, whatever, and then after the commitment, it still feels like a 50-50, I don't know if it really feels like a 50-50. And I think that's where I'm kind of landing on it. But also, because I couldn't believe it, KJ Ford is also being recruited, at least on On3. His primary recruiter is Christian Robinson, who, of course, was with Florida a few years back under Dan Mullen, and then left for Auburn and then Baylor, and is now the outside linebackers coach at Alabama. And that would just be like, there's no even context to add to that. It's just a fun, like, why not? Why wouldn't that be a thing that happens story in recruiting? But just to add another layer to the potential burn of losing it. Again, I feel like I'm usually not one that cares about like losing a recruit that much or losing a commit that much. I did see the timeline started calling out Mike Peterson for this, and I will say I have been pretty open about my feelings about Mike Peterson, that I don't think he's a great coach. That's just my opinion. I thought Florida should have upgraded this past offseason. But this recruit shouldn't be the thing that makes anybody think that. Just want to like losing one recruit shouldn't be the reason that you all of a sudden turn on him. There's reasons, and I don't think that losing a kid that maybe never really wanted to come here is one of those. Because again, if it's true that Kevin Ford initiated the contact, then no matter what, I'm gonna always think, well, does he really want to be here or not? Florida also is in play for another offensive target this weekend. We'll talk about that on Locked On Gators. You ever wish managing your money just felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and all of your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with monarchmoney.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And we're going to talk about Hezi Kent here, which again, I'm sorry if that's not how it's pronounced. I was pronouncing it He's, and someone told me it was Hezi. And so I'm still hoping for legitimate confirmation there. But Hezi Kent, 4-star on all platforms and giant dude, right? Like, no, there's no other way to describe Hezi Kent other than complete freak of nature, just at that size, because he is 6'6". Depending on where you look, he's 320 pounds, 305 pounds. It's all over the place. But he's also very nimble for that size, right? Like, and many people look at the size and say, okay, that's an offensive lineman. Many people look at the film and say, okay, that's a tight end. And now we're getting On3 reports that Hezi Kent is being listed as an offensive tackle now, right? They also report that Florida is still selling him on being a tight end. And that's an interesting conversation because it opens up the size is offensive tackle and the film is tight end. And I do believe that maybe the happy medium for Hezi Kent is, while you have tight end level athleticism, you have offensive tackle size, and those two things rarely coexist. And we should get the most possible value out of that, right? For both your career long-term and for our success now. Offensive tackle is a significantly more valuable position than tight end. Even an elite tight end is not as valuable as a pretty damn good offensive tackle that's below elite. So the thought is, well, if we can get this offensive tackle size with tight end athleticism and develop him, that's an incredible player you have. Like, we're talking. One of my favorite draft prospects I've ever scouted was Christian Darrisaw out of Virginia Tech, and he reminded me a lot of Trent Williams. If you can find a guy with this size and athleticism and get him to actually work, that's the kind of player. Like I'm saying more so Christian Darrisaw. I'm not going to compare anybody to Trent Williams because that's just not fair to them. But like, if you can get a Christian Darrisaw type player, you can get a stud athletic offensive tackle. You could do that. You should do that. And if you're Hezi Kent, you should do that because your salary is going to be so much higher as an offensive tackle in the NFL than it would be as a tight end. And I understand also the thought of people that say, hey, well, if you can have that hit at tight end, he can be a complete anomaly, and that could be huge, and you could revolutionize your passing attack. And yeah, he could. And there are people that say, hey, let him do that at first. Like, let him try to play tight end and then move to offensive tackle. And I understand that thought process as well, because it does make sense, right? If he wants to play tight end, let him fail at tight end before forcing him to tackle. It's the conversation that often happens with college tackles that are going to be NFL guards. It's, well, I'm going to let you fail at tackle before I move you to guard. I'm going to let you fail at your position before I just move you. And I understand that thought process as well, but I would also argue that, well, offensive tackle is an incredibly difficult position to play. You need to be incredibly technically sound and very consistent in it. And so the earlier you make that change, the better. But again, if Florida is reportedly selling him on, hey, we're still recruiting you as a tight end, we can still find a role for you, it feels to me like the most likely scenario is, we'll let you try tight end. Like, yeah, he can try tight end, but there's a decent chance it doesn't work. And within a year, we're going to move him to offensive tackle. Like, if it doesn't work this year, or also that's another conversation because tight ends aren't going to contribute in year one anyway. So do you give him 2 years, probably burn a year of eligibility and then have one redshirt year? Do you burn that year of eligibility and then say, hey, we're going to move you to tackle? Does he want to make that move at that point, or does he want to go somewhere else where he can get more featured? Like, looking down the line here, it's just such an interesting conversation to me. And yeah, so I just think that it's an incredibly interesting conversation. It's an incredibly unique situation, which, again, you don't get all the time here. That's why they're unique, obviously. But at that size with that physical skill set, he could be an elite player at the offensive tackle position. And if I'm Florida, I'm taking him at any position. But I'm just saying that if there's a legitimate chance of playing offensive tackle, which early on in this recruiting process, it didn't feel like that was something that was reportedly something you're super open to. Like, it was like, yep, tight end, that's what he is. But if the actual conversation is, hey, I'm willing to make the move to tackle, I think the earlier you do it, the better. And Hezi Kent is the guy that I've been talking about as saying, well, if you're taking a +1 on the roster at offensive line, it should be Hezi Kent. I do think that, again, there's no film of him playing offensive tackle and going through the whole process. And that's a guy that I'd still be willing to say, hey, I will take you in that room as a +1 because that's the kind of ceiling he has. Again, if he does play tight end, he still has the skill set to work there. My argument isn't he can't work at tight end. My argument is that there's a hell of a lot more value in playing offensive tackle, again, for your own pockets. But he's someone that, whether it's tight end, whether it's offensive tackle, if he gets even close to his ceiling, he's going to be a monster. He is, because, again, great athlete for that size especially, but just a generally pretty good athlete for a tight end. So if he is valuable in the passing game, at that size with the potential to play offensive tackle, you're probably going to work on his blocking a lot more. He's already pretty decent there for a tight end. Having that skill set is huge, right? Like that could be huge for him. If he works out of the offensive tackle, he works out of the offensive tackle, and that's great too. But either way, he's got insane ceiling. I think Hezi Kent is one of the players that I've been most excited for their ceiling that we've had in a long time. Just because if he does hit that ceiling, it's going to be incredible to see. Like he's got a wild ceiling. And you watch the film, he's also just fun, but wild ceiling there. I think it's still Florida. I think most people think it's still Florida. It was, took OVs to Florida, Miami, Georgia Tech, Texas, and Florida State. Some of those schools have taken tight ends since then. Maybe some of those schools only view him as an offensive tackle, and he's kind of valuing tight end. We had a Tayshaun Gelsey situation last year with Florida State. Florida wasn't really willing to let him be part of the receiver class. Florida State was. He wanted to play receiver. That led to that decision being made. It wasn't the only factor, but it was a factor in it. And maybe that's what it is for some teams. Like maybe he's thinking Florida's going to let me try tight end, so I'm picking tight end. And maybe that's the case. But I still think it's Florida. I don't know. It feels like it's been so obviously swinging in Florida's favor that at this point in time, it's kind of tough to look at it and think that it's going to go a different direction, which is the least comfortable position when you're too comfortable. But Hezi Kent, again, should be a Florida Gator. I think that's been very public that this has been the case. We've been talking about it for months here. You look at Hezi Kent's posts on social media, and Florida is the most common school. You look at Russ Callaway's posts, and Hezi Kent is one of the most common players posted. There's a good reason for that. Like, there's a lot of love, and, recruiting is, or should be, love who loves you. And Hezi Kent, Florida, seemed like a great match. Hopefully it's one's going to happen tomorrow. One more player is committing this week, and then we're talking about the defensive player, linebacker, DQ Forpa. We're going to talk about that on Locked On Gators. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And linebacker DQ Forpa is announcing his commitment this week so that he is hopefully going to be able to join this 2026 recruiting class. Note that I think it was in mid-June. There were other reports about him committing at that time, and it got pushed back. So maybe that happens again. But right now, DQ Forpa is a 3-star on On3 and 24/7, 4-star on ESPN, 4-star on Rivals. ESPN is the only site that has him ranked nationally, 41st overall. Linebacker rank, he's On3, he's 42nd. 24/7, he's 21st. ESPN, he's 5th. And Rivals, he's 19th. He's the 42nd linebacker on three, and he's the 41st player on ESPN. That's how big of a gap there is here. And, based on how many sites have him unranked nationally, I'm assuming he's going to get a decent bump during this update that's supposed to happen in July. I'm fairly certain. Because that's just that kind of difference you don't usually see. But for a while, it felt like DQ Forpa was going to be a Florida and Florida State battle. And then it felt like it was going to be a Florida battle and kind of an only Florida battle. And for a long time, it felt really comfortable there. He is committing, by the way, which I forgot to say, he's committing tomorrow, as is Hezi Kent. Kevin Ford is committing today at some point. But with DQ Forpa, I feel like Miami has kind of fallen off completely because they were initially in that conversation. So I feel like they kind of fell off completely. Florida State was still there. Michigan was always there. Michigan is a school that he's visited the most, as well as Florida State. And so Michigan was always there. And then we got reports yesterday that Michigan was actually making a pretty strong push for DQ Forpa, which, similar to the Kevin Ford situation, doesn't always feel great when you've got kind of a late addition to the party. But with Michigan pushing, I want to say that I think it's still Florida right now. But with this late push, I'd be interested to know just how much he's actually considering this. Because again, all we've been told is that Michigan is making a really strong push, which I do think is, do they mean strong is just they're putting a lot of pressure, or strong is it's making a big impact? But I do think either way, I don't know, like we knew with Kevin Ford that Alabama was a school he always loved, right? Like it was always very public that he loved Alabama. But again, just felt like for whatever reason that changed and Alabama was no longer favored there. And then all of a sudden they are again. So we know that he's always loved Alabama. We know that DQ Forpa loves Michigan, but I feel like this one felt like so quiet for so long. Again, I still want to say that it's going to be Florida. I'm interested in a couple things, though, with what does Florida do if he does pick Michigan? There's Isaiah Williams, but does Florida now put more pressure? Because it's always felt like Malik Morris, DQ Forpa, and then Isaiah Williams would be the third addition to it. But I'd be very interested to know if DQ Forpa does commit to Michigan. How does that go for Florida? But again, I still don't think that we're fully looking at Michigan overtaking Florida in this situation. Again, making progress and making a push and making someone think twice. Sure, that's going to happen. Every school that is genuinely interested in the kid the day before his recruitment is probably going to make a last-ditch effort, right? But so I think that when they say they're making a strong push late, I feel like the strong is more of saying the emphasis put on by Michigan in this recruitment and less about it actually doing enough to flip DQ Forpa. Because again, when I think of the Kevin Ford recruitment, he always loved Alabama and he made the move. He made the push for Alabama. Again, he'd still pick Florida, but he made the push for Alabama. DQ Forpa has always loved Michigan, and we've known that, but Michigan made the push. And I do think that's an important distinction here, where it doesn't feel as 50-50 for me. It feels, sure, less confident than Florida was before, but I still think this is Florida. I would just be interested to know the fallout of if it's not Florida, but I still think it's Florida here. I still think Florida's in the lead for DQ Forpa. I still think Florida will land DQ Forpa tomorrow, but it's just it's an interesting recruiting weekend for what 2 days ago, based on, all the RPMs and crystal balls and all that stuff, based on all the predictions, every Florida fan was like, oh my God, we're getting Kevin Ford, we're getting Hezi Kent, we're getting DQ Forpa. And then now in the past 24 hours, it's become, hey, Ford is actually the one that reached out to Alabama, and Michigan's pushing for DQ Forpa. It's just never one dull moment here. It's just it's insane to see. But damn, it's fun to be a Florida Gator fan. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free, wherever in the podcast and on YouTube. We will be back hopefully later today, hopefully tomorrow at the absolute latest. But I'm gonna say we'll be back tomorrow, right? Because I might go live to lose my mind if Florida doesn't land any commits, which again I still feel that they will land two, hopefully a third. But for Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.